In today's video, I've got 17 of my best watercolor painting tips for trees and foliage. 4 years after I started watercolor painting, I would avoid painting trees, landscapes altogether, to be honest. I just couldn't sort of think how to attack such a big subject and how to get them looking realistic. And I've seen my students over the years end up with trees that just look a little bit blobby and unrealistic. So if that's you, you're going to love today's tips and tricks. We're going to start with a few simple drawing techniques that are going to give you that real realistic base underlayer that you need to put your paint on top of. You don't need a lot of drawing, but we need to get it right. Through the video then, we're going to look at stems and trunks. We're going to look at colour mixing. We're also going to look at the main thing that you need to get with trees, which is a little bit of variation, a little bit of texture to stop them looking like big, round, blocky lumps. So let's get started with tip number 1. So my first tip today is to tip out the base of your tree trunks, whatever shape trees they are. And if you have, several in one drawing, then it might just be that you do this to one or two, but it's going to help them to appear grounded. Now, of course, some trees you can actually, see the roots going into the ground. Some trees that come up, and have those almost completely straight sides, they may just come straight up like this. But even with those, if you're doing, say, a lot of them in a row, birch trees, something like that, then I would just occasionally tip out the base. It just is going to root them into the ground. Now, of course, there are thousands of species of tree across the globe, and it may be that you look at some of these tips and say, well, the ones that I'm painting don't look anything like that, but there should be lots of things that you can adapt to any type of tree within this video. And that's my first tip, to at least some of the time in your drawings and paintings to tip out the base of the tree trunk so it just looks like it roots into the ground. Tip 2, and you can see I've already started doing it here, is to understand that on most types of tree, in fact, most plants that grow, they get narrower as they grow up and out. Now, there are exceptions to that rule, particularly things like cacti, where you may find that this doesn't apply, but generally speaking, things get narrower as they go up and out. I also like to draw a tree branch almost as a series of straight lines. People have a tendency to curve them like this and not really pay attention to what's happening to the shape. Whereas in reality, tree branches grow slowly and they follow the lights. You'll find they tend to go up and then they might change direction and change direction again. All the time remembering that they will get significantly thinner as they go up and out, whether it's the trunk getting narrower or the individual branches. Each one will not only be generally narrower than the one before, but that in itself will also get narrower. As I said, there are exceptions to this rule, and for those exceptions you should use your observation, but generally speaking, all your branches and trunks will get progressively narrower as they grow up and out from the base. So one last drawing tip before we get on to looking at some colour mixing for branches and trunks. And that's that when you do your initial drawing, particularly of a large tree, you want to leave some gaps. Now, there are several ways of doing this because you don't want to just randomly place branches here and there. We need gaps because we don't want the watercolour, which is transparent, to trap all the pencil in and for it to look almost like you've done this extensive drawing of branches and the paint's just sitting on top. So it's a good idea to leave gaps in your pencil. Remember, I'm drawing far darker on camera so you can see than you actually have to in real life. But what you can do if you're leaving a gap is just, for example, imagine this carries on here and then we might come up like this. Maybe there's another branch here and then perhaps we're leaving a gap here. You want to leave the most gaps on the outer edges of where the foliage is going to be. But as I said, there must be a connection between these things. Don't just randomly start, placing branches floating in the sky like UFOs. Another way of doing this, if you're not sure you can get it right, is to just draw very lightly all of your branches in place. And then before you start painting, you can just make some gaps with your eraser. I'll show you later in the video how to place the foliage on top. Let's look at some options now for colour mixing for tree trunks and branches in particular. Now, I do find that these are more often cool than warm. That's not to say that you don't get some trees and branches with warm browns, but I just find that they tend to be cooler. So two of my favourite options for ready mixed colours are this one here, which is sepia. So when watered down, it looks something like this. And sepia is what they call a mixed colour. So each manufacturer will have its own version. Some will be more yellow, some will be more grey. This one is Talon's Rembrandt, I believe. And it's also a very strong colour. So we can actually go very dark with it indeed. Another good option for lighter sort of bleached branches, things like driftwood, is this colour here. This is raw umber. And you can see that it's sort of a cool, muted, sandy colour. This one is also a very good option for tree branches. Now, the dark brown you're most likely to get in a beginner's set is this one here, which is burnt umber. Now, certainly in the UK, this is usually too warm to give natural looking tree branches. But if you do have warm colours that you're painting, then this could be a great option for you. If you want to cool it down and you don't have a sepia, then a great trick is just to put a little bit of a warm blue in. So that would be an ultramarine or a cobalt blue. What this will do is it will push the brown towards grey, like so. Now, the reason I say to use an ultramarine or a cobalt is because when you have a colour like brown where there's a lot of yellow in it, if you choose a blue that tends very heavily towards the teal and turquoise end of the spectrum, there is a chance that you could get some green. Of course, there are no exact rules, you can experiment, but these are some of my favourite mixes. Let's look at how to make a tree trunk or a branch appear curved. Now, if you ever did those sketches at school where you sketched an orb, a sphere, and you shaded darker colours towards the edge and it made it look curved, we can do the same with our trees. So I'm going back to my sepia here and we'll come up like this. And it's a good idea to paint upwards and outwards as well. Your paintbrush will naturally cause the stroke to narrow as it goes up. You can even use this if you want to, add some extra branches that you haven't drawn in, and you'll get that natural tapered effect. Now, what we can do to make this trunk look curved is we can place a bit of shadow down one side. Now, it will depend on your subject whether the shadow goes just down one side or you can place it down both sides. When something coloured tips away from us, and I'm just lifting out a bit of a highlight in the centre here, when something coloured tips away from us, there's a natural sort of condensing almost with perspective of all those pigments. So things can appear darker as they go away from us. And there's a natural effect with aerial perspective of things that are closest to us. And if we imagine this was a curved trunk, the centre would be slightly closer to us than the edges which curve away. That's going to give us the optical illusion that this trunk is curved. Let's look now at a couple of ways of getting texture onto our tree trunks and branches, particularly when they're close up and you can see all the little marks and the wood grain. One of my favourite ones is to use a scalpel like this. Now, you can do this on dry paper first, or you can go into wet paper like this. Just bear in mind that the paper's a little more fragile when wet. I'm holding the knife on its side, and again, I'm going up and out and mimicking the natural shape of wood grain. It's important not to just do any rough old scratches. And if this is going on a proper painting, I would practice a little bit first to see if it looks realistic. The more layers of paint you place on, the more the pigment is going to sink into those dark marks. But don't go too dark or you'll cover them up completely. My second favourite way of getting marks on tree trunks is to use a watercolour pencil like this one. Now, these can be bought individually. You don't need to get an entire set of pencils. A dark brown, a dark green, and something like a scarlet red will be suitable for most of the purposes you need. And you see I'm going onto wet paper here, which is helping to release pigment. I've got tons of other videos all about using watercolor pencils. I'll link to one of those for you in the description of this video so you can get started. Now let's talk about hard and soft edges. You can see that where I went into these branches up here, I just continued along from the trunk and straight into the branches, but you do get occasions where you have more of a delineated line, especially when you get one of those sort of bulges appearing. And in this case, what you want to do is let the first area dry so that it doesn't bleed in, and then we can place the second one on top like this. Can make it a little bit less stressful as well. You haven't got to keep everything wet at the same time. And if you want to sort of highlight that little join there, you can, of course, again, just use a watercolor pencil in places. It's a good idea not to outline the whole thing. Just put it in places, and that's going to help you get some texture. So we're halfway through. We've got another 8 tips and tricks to go. And if you're enjoying this video, please do click that thumbs up. That like button really helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Don't forget to subscribe as well. Unlike most art channels here on YouTube, I am fully cat approved. So let's get on with tip number 9. Now, in the beginning, we talked about splaying your pencil lines out like this so that your tree trunk looks rooted in the ground. But there's also another way of doing this, particularly if the tree's a little bit further away. What we can do is we can spread the paint at the base. And I sometimes do this in sort of tandem with putting the grass in below. So we can paint our tree trunk like so. And then whilst it's still wet, we can actually allow it to bleed into the grass below. You can manipulate this in various ways, allowing the green to grow up as if there were some grasses perhaps growing up. And again, getting that idea of the tree rooting into the ground rather than sort of being stuck on top like a Lego tower. As you can see, I have a lot of paints. Now, there are 2 ways you can make greens. You can mix your blues and your yellows together, or you can use some ready-made greens. None of these are wrong, but let's look at some of my favourite combinations for tree foliage. And before we look at that, let's look at one that I don't recommend using neat as it is, or at least you should be careful of it. A lot of beginners sets contain this. It's phthalo green. Sometimes it's labelled as Viridian. As you can see, it's not a particularly natural colour, but we can easily adjust this. Now, 2 simple ways of adjusting this are to put something a bit warmer and muddier in, like this yellow ochre. We can also add one of my favourite colours when painting trees, and that's ultramarine. Now, ultramarine is what they call a granulating colour. So it's going to give a grainy texture as it dries. It's also, as we spoke about earlier in the video, tending towards the warm purple end of the spectrum, and red and green are opposite colours, so you'll never get a green that is too bright when you use ultramarine. Some of the lighter yellows can be great too, lemon yellow, or even a slightly warmer cadmium yellow. I've got lots of videos on this channel in my colour mixing playlist that will help you to mix natural greens, but you won't go far wrong with some of these. As well as yellows and blues and ready mixed greens, we can also use our third primary and add some red. So there's a couple of reasons we might do this and a couple of types of red we might add. Now again, if I've got a green that's just way too bright, then adding a touch of pink is going to help to neutralize that color. So if you're just looking at your picture and you're thinking, well, it's just a bit boring, it's, there's not enough difference in the shades here, try adding in a little bit of pink, something like a quinacridone pink or a permanent rose, and you'll instantly give your colors more dimension. But we've also got these warmer scarlet reds here, like this cadmium red light, that are going to give us more autumny tones. They'll tend to turn your greens into browns. And further up here, we have the red oxide colours. These are fantastic if you want to add a little bit of autumn colours to your work. You might perhaps want to combine them with a warm yellow or a gold to get those full on autumn colours. My next tip is one that you've seen me doing here already. Mix your colours on the paper. So even if you're using a yellow like this one and a blue, don't mix them up in a separate dish and then apply them as one flat colour when they look so much more beautiful mixed on the paper. Another tip that you've already seen me do is to leave gaps. So the most gaps want to be on the outside, where we might go down to tiny little brush marks like this. As we get towards the middle, we're going to join more areas together. Now I've got some Daniel Smith green gold here, which is a lovely colour. I'm just using it alone here so you can see what it looks like. But something that I do like to do is to make my shadows go into the center here. So in order to do that, I'll add yellow to the outside and blue to the center, or maybe I'll use a bright color like this. But let's use this instead of a yellow, but let's use this as our base for this one. I think this is 20 different trees in one we've got today. So towards the center, we're going to add blues. You could even, if you wanted, add a touch of something like Payne's Grey to get those darks in the middle. As we come to the top and outside edges, we'll go more into yellows where the light will catch the outside of the tree. If you find it hard to paint texture like I've been doing here, try a texture brush. This one is a cheap acrylic fan brush. Now, it didn't come with a ragged edge like this. Brushes like that can be very expensive. All I did was I took some hairdressing scissors, or you can use some nail scissors or embroidery scissors. And what you want to do is snip this way, cutting directly towards the bristles until you have a nice ragged edge like this. Your other option is an old toothbrush, particularly the ones that have got splayed out bristles or that are naturally cut into that zigzag shape. The older and more disgusting they get, the better they'll be for painting. And we can use these brushes like so. And with this one, I'm just going to press down with a bit of pressure. Now this can give an interesting look. It can also look a bit unnatural. So what I like to do is go into the center, perhaps with a darker color, and just join up some of the areas so that we get a combination of types of mark. And that's particularly useful if this sort of brush has made marks that are too regular on your paper. A simple technique that I use all the time when painting foliage is to blot. Now you can not only get some interesting marks like this, and I'll go in multiple times, putting fresh paint on top, even clean water, and blotting. Blotting with paper towel like this tends to leave very sort of geometric, hard-edged little marks, which are perfect when you're trying to get that leaf type texture. However, they can also be amazing for tree trunks that are sitting in dappled sunlight. So what we can do is go in with quite a strong color like this, scrunch up your paper towel, and then just blot in places. And again, you can go back in where you need to and really get the impression of dappled sunlight on your tree trunks. Lastly, I've got a colour mixing tip for when you're painting silhouette trees in a sunset. I don't want you to use black like this. Now, I'm not an artist that never uses black, but unfortunately, although it seems to look good in photographs, black trees never really look very good in watercolour paintings. They look far too harsh. What I like to do instead is pick a really dark colour, preferably something I've already used within my sunset painting. If I'm working in a limited palette, I might use a lovely warm aubergine purple like this one. What about this indigo blue? Or even a deep sunset or burgundy red. All of these are going to make your sunsets look more alive than a black like this. And there's no end to the colours you can choose as long as they're very dark and have already been used in your sunset. Don't be afraid to use a dark green, a dark brown, a blue, a purple, anything at all. It's going to make your sunsets come to life. So do let me know in the comments which ones of these tips and tricks you found the most interesting, and if you're going to give any of them a go in your own work. Before you leave this video, don't forget to have a look in the video description. There's all sorts of free stuff down there. There's some free PDFs, there's even a free watercolour painting course. You can find details of my Facebook groups and all of my paid online courses. And now that we've made some realistic looking trees together, we do of course need to think about the landscape we're going to plant these trees in. I'll leave one of my best watercolour landscape painting videos up for you to watch next.